you, and then we move over to, then you are introducing the speaker, right?
Right.
So let's start then. Vivek, are we ready? Okay. So let me welcome all of you in the next series of the Friday webinar series. As you know, eGrow Foundation is a policy-oriented research think tank. We believe in research-based policy advice. It is in that context that we are doing this Friday webinar series. And in each of the Friday webinar series, we attempt to bring the best minds in the world to come and speak to us. It is in that same context. Today, we have invited Professor Seema Butler to come and speak to us. To chair the session today, we have Dr. Ashok Vishandas, who is a professor at IIPA and who has been the chairman of CSCP before taking over this assignment. I would request Dr. Vishandas to take over and chair the session. Dr. Vishandas, please.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Charan Singh, for introducing me. This is a proud privilege for me to introduce a speaker like Seema Batla ji. She is currently the professor of economics in JNU. Before that, she was the associate professor. In fact, she started her career from the Punjab Agricultural University as a research institute, as a research associate. She has gone from there, then did her master's from the Punjab. Then she did MPhil from Delhi School of Economics and followed by PhD from JNU. And she finally chose to join as professor in the same institute from where she did the PhD. I'm grateful to her for having having agreed to our request to speak to our audience. That is one. She is prolific in her research. She has written 16 books and report, 62 research articles and edited books, and a number of other research projects she has completed. And today she is going to discuss about the agriculture vision 2050, 30 years down the road. And that's very, very exciting. And agriculture is close to my heart. So I and many other participants will be loving to listen to her views. See, we have come a long distance from net importing country to self-sufficiency, and then to net food exporting country. And then our emphasis has been for green revolution to increase the tonnage. It was tonnage centric, and then in the broad agriculture policy, it was assumed if the production and productivity increases, the farmers' income will also increase. But the empirics show that it has not happened. The farmers' income has not increased commensurately, and therefore there is something is missing in our agriculture. If the farmers are sweating and they have made us proud nation that we are not only feeding our 1.37 billion people, and after feeding so many people, we are exporting. So great salute to the farmer on one hand, but then their welfare has not been taken care explicitly. Now is the time that the farmers' welfare has to be brought to the center of development agenda, so that we should not be only the tonnage centric, but the income centric approach should be there. And our agriculture policy has been broadly based on the subsidy, whether it's the input subsidy or the output subsidy. Input in the seed, fertilizer, we have been giving in the price subsidy, and in the output in the farmer MSP, we have been giving the subsidy. And so this was, but some nations, they agree on the income subsidy, a sort of. Now, what is the best model and how we go from now to 2050? It is very, very exciting. And let me also add one thing before I hand over the baton to Professor Seema ji. See, when rocket is launched, it has to be fired from the bottom. That means when you are doing the reform, it has to start from the agriculture, that is the primary sector, then secondary is the manufacturing, and then tertiary sector is the services sector. What cardinal mistake we did in the past, we started reform from the top, and then if you fire the rocket from the top, it cannot take off. So something like this, with few words, I would request Professor Seemaji to kindly enlighten us her thoughts on this very, very important subject, Agriculture Vision 2050. Over to you, Professor Seemaji.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vishan Das, for your kind words. And I would like to say good afternoon to the esteemed audience. And also would like to thank you, eGrow Foundation, for giving me an opportunity to deliver a talk on Vision Agriculture 2050. I must say that, the foundation has chosen a very important topic for discussion today, but it is very vast and complex. I have been listening to, Professor Ashok for the last so many years, and now, it's really, amazing that you have invited me to talk rather than, I used to get enlightened from your talks. As I said that, this topic is very vast and complex. Also, while it is very important to have a long-term vision for this sector, we must realize that farmers face problems on day-to-day basis for which solutions are hard to find and resolve. Let me begin with a snapshot on India's agriculture sector. So how do I, Vivek, I need to start with the next
Use the arrow keys. Use the arrow keys. Left, right.
Left, right. So how do I go?
Click on the right side. Click on the right side of this slide.
I did. Yeah. Okay, on the right hand side.
It works. Yes.
Okay. So is it visible to all?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, so let me begin with a snapshot on India's agriculture sector. We initiated important reform measures from 1950 to mid-80s, starting with consolidation of land holdings, massive investments in canal irrigation systems, input and output price support, changes in the financial architecture to strengthen institutional credit, establishment of CSCP, FCI, regulated wholesale markets governed under APMC Act 1968, the Essential Commodities Act 1955 for stock limits. India was able to achieve food security, lessen hunger and poverty, and produce diversified products due to three revolutions, that is green, yellow, and white. However, from mid-80s, food grain productivity growth began to decelerate along with the fall in the terms of trade, that is relative prices, and decline in public expenditure on both investment and subsidy. Agriculture was seriously neglected while other economic sectors embarked upon a series of reform measures, as Dr. Ashok has just indicated. Despite liberalization in agriculture trade from mid-90s, increase in input support, and reforms in the model APMC 2003, agriculture productivity growth continued to stagnate, export competitiveness remained low, along with unsustainable use of natural resources. Agriculture sector received attention only from 2003-04. Higher outlays towards investment and subsidies, hike in minimum support price, initiation of several flagship programs, and investment support measures triggered growth. There has been an impressive increase in agriculture output in many laggard states, but this has not led to a corresponding increase in investment and income of the farmers. Farmers are affected by rising input cost, climatic, pest, and market risk. There has been an uneven growth across the state, lack of good governance in irrigation and power sectors. An important highlight is that despite these structural and institutional reforms during the last so many decades, agriculture continues to face pressing issues which need to be addressed to bring out its true growth potential and increase farmers' income while maintaining the natural resource base. We have 86% of small holdings, that is less than 2 hectares, which may or may not be economically viable. Technological innovations are not coming up fast. Prices of inputs are growing. There are large social and regional disparities, risk from floods, droughts, price volatility, and other issues that constrain agricultural growth. I'll be taking up only three broad, distinct, yet interrelated issues for discussion and the way forward under each based on my research studies. The first important concern is non-realization of structural change in the workforce that Dr. Ashok just mentioned. So if we go by, the theories given by the development economist, it is argued that in the process of economic development, almost all the economies would pass through a similar growth pattern. In the initial phase, the resources are reallocated from agriculture to industry, while in the second phase, there is a reallocation from industry to the service sector. With high economic growth and agriculture productivity, the agriculture sector behaves like any other sector in the economy. It is further argued that even though the share of agriculture in total income and labor share goes down in the process, agriculture continues to play a significant role in bringing about convergence in the living standard across the urban and rural populations and poverty alleviation. Initially, rural-urban labor productivity differentials widen until a turning point is reached and rural labor productivity starts catching up with the urban labor productivity. Therefore, policies be designed to allow the poor to cope up with changes in the economy. Examples are given of sound public policies being adopted by many Asian economies, notably South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and more recently in Vietnam and China, and hence their miraculous growth spurt. What has been our experience vis-a-vis other countries? The developed countries achieved structural transformation long back. They had a higher share of GDP agriculture in total GDP and total employment at nearly 20%. In due course, while agriculture GDP share in these economies is less than 2%, the employment share turns out to be less than 4%. The industry share in GDP and employment is around 25%, and it is the service sector that has captured a major share of more than 70%. And their agriculture, as you know, has seen a rapid growth. Now, if we compare India with other Asian countries, we find that agriculture income or GDP share is very high, that is more than 30% during the 60s, which fell to nearly 8% in China, Thailand, Philippines, and Malaysia. India and Pakistan, as you can see from the slide, had the highest share of agriculture in total income at 50%, which is now reduced to 22% and 14% respectively. The share of industry in GDP is around 35% and is relatively lower in Pakistan and India. We can see that the share of services in GDP has gone up, which is a positive sign. So a fall in the relative share of agriculture GDP in the process of economic growth is okay, but the biggest failure is on the employment front. As you can see from this slide, India's employment share of agriculture was 63% in 1991 and is now 43%, which is again very high. Industry and service sectors are not able to generate much employment. So I've tried to capture the long-term trends in the structural transformation based on GAP. GAP is a measure of structural transformation which is estimated as agri employment share in total employment minus agri GDP share in total GDP. The trends show a fall in the gap across the Asian countries except in Myanmar and Nepal. Red line is of India. We may say that the structural transformation in most of the Asian economies, including India, is atypical due to a slow pace of reallocation of labor from agriculture to high productivity sectors, that is industry and services. And clearly, convergence in per capita income or in labor productivity is a distant. Sorry, did you say anything? These are the, these are the sectoral shares in rural areas, and we see that labor is being absorbed mainly in the construction and agro-processing sector. The skilled services share is slightly going up, which is something positive. But the issue is that agriculture in India still employs 42% of workers and supports 55% of population, yet produces 13% of GDP. The agri and non-agriculture per worker income ratio was 1:3.8 in 1987 and has hardly gone up to 1:5.3 in 2011 as per the latest data. The process of structural transformation in India is delayed and stunted. Workers are slowly exiting from agriculture towards non-farm job, but they are largely engaged in low quality and casual job. There's a strong need for creation of non-farm jobs in rural areas, skill formation, and other favorable policies such as investment in education, infrastructure, technology, health, small-scale manufacturing unit, as has been done in China and other Asian economies. Nonetheless, it is the agriculture sector which has to play a key role in faster structural transformation due to its direct and indirect effects through food price wage link, backward and forward linkage with industry and tertiary sector. Higher land and labor productivity growth will provide opportunities to labor to move, and this is the second point of discussion in my presentation. And my focus is mainly on the importance of public investment as a source of higher productivity and growth in agriculture. Just to give a slight background, we are aware that in India's federal structure, the powers, function, and responsibilities of the center and the states are primarily governed by the Constitution of India. The subjects that each can legislate on and administer are set out in three lists: union, state, and concurrent list. The Constitution places irrigation, flood control, agriculture, and allied activities under the jurisdiction of states. The states finance their expenditure through own tax and non-tax resources, borrowings, transfers from the center, grants for implementation of centrally sponsored scheme, CSS. Center also provides funds directly to agriculture universities for research and development, bear expenses relating to interstate rivers and fisheries outside territorial water, bear expenses of fertilizer and food subsidies, cost of procurement of food grade and grains at minimum support price, and its distribution under the public distribution system. However, there is considerable asymmetry in the fiscal relations, with a majority of states having larger expenditure and responsibilities than the center, but lesser sources of revenue and hence have deficit. States also have a higher fiscal burden due to farm loan waivers and initiation of income and investment support schemes. A few state governments allocate between 9% and 43% of their agriculture budget to such schemes. States remain discontent to lower share in the tax revenue of the center. They also demand greater flexibility and autonomy in the implementation of the CSS, which are tied up with certain conditions. The sharing ratio is fixed at 60:40 between the center and the states. Without going into further details of a federal structure and the state financing, I find one important outcome, and that is the resource crunch being faced by the states and its direct impact on investment in agriculture and irrigation, which is crucial for growth. A closer look at the trends in public and private gross capital formation in agriculture, that is investment, show 9 times increase in total investment to rupees 2400 billion at 2011-12. As of today, the figure is 2700 billion. Out of this investment, the share of public investment is only 15%. Share of private investment, that is farm household share, is 82%, and only 3% shares of corporates, mainly in the tea and coffee plantation. Public investment share was as high as 50% during the 60s and the 70s, and now it has just fallen to 15%. From 2000 to 17, the average annual public investment, which is mainly in major and medium irrigation, is rupees 401 billion. Investment in agriculture and allied activities is given separately in the national account statistics at rupees 107 billion. So public investment is growing at nearly 6% per annum, while private investment, that is by farmers, shows a negative rate of growth from 2010 to 2017. Spending on input subsidies has increased from 100 billion to 1200 billion at 2011-12 prices. The important concern is a low level of public investment in agriculture and irrigation. If you can see on per hectare basis, it is only 3600 per annum, which is significantly lower than other Asian economies like Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. Within the economy also, the share of agriculture investment in total investment has steadily declined from 17% during the 60s to 6% by 2017-18. Clearly, the brunt of fall in public investment, which has been evident in the economy, is borne more by the agriculture sector in comparison to other economic sector. We can see that out of total income from agriculture, that is GDPA, if you see on the right hand side, public spending on agriculture is 11%, of which only 3% is directed towards asset formation, and the remaining 8% is towards provision of input subsidy. This demonstrates that state governments accord less priority to agriculture and irrigation investment in comparison to this sector's contribution to national income. Less fiscal space is given to agriculture by Haryana, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and West Bengal. Some improvement in it is found in Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, Punjab, and Uttarakhand. One may say that government spending on agriculture has increased through provision of input subsidies. Our estimate is 1200 billion, but official figure is 900 billion, which is more than double the amount spent by government on investment in agriculture and irrigation at 508 billion rupees. Out of total subsidy of rupees 3733 billion across all the economic activities, agriculture share, that is this 900 billion figure, constitute only 25.8% share, which is somewhat close to that given to the mining, manufacturing, construction sectors. Studies show that while support is essential for farmers to meet their input requirements in the short run, it is the investment that is needed to spur growth in the long run. The critical question, therefore, is there a trade-off between spending on input subsidy and investment? Before talking about this issue, I feel, that states should have a vision for agriculture, maybe a plan at a district level. The foremost requirement in that case is to scale up investment. The Committee on Doubling Farm Income recommended that public investment in agriculture has to increase annually at 14% to double farmers' income by 2022-23, though the percentage varies across the state. At All India, since 2000, public investment has grown at 8 to 9%, but the private investment, that is by the farmer household, has a negative growth, which is, very serious matter. Second is to raise capital use efficiency and governance in canal system. It is an important institutional intervention. As such, if we see capital expenditure data on irrigation, it is very low, out of which only 60% is utilized for asset formation. Rest goes in stock or maintaining inventory. Similarly, in capital spending on agriculture, only 45% is towards asset creation. Third point which I would like to make is that public investment is mainly in irrigation, as per the statistics given by the Government of India. It has to synchronize with changing investment requirements of farmers. Rural households have changing preference towards purchase of tractor, machinery, and livestock, and they seek extension services and information on weather and soil condition. In fact, public expenditure policy should be reassessed primarily to address the needs of the farmer, mounting problems due to climatic changes, disasters, and depleting water resources. India needs much more types of investment, maybe on PPP model in water recycling, weather information, satellite mapping of crop, precision farming, artificial intelligence, and so on. But our public expenditure policy has focused mainly on micro, major, and medium irrigation system. So investment by startups should be scaled up by offering them fiscal incentive, as in case of food processing industry. Digitization of land records is now a necessity if we wish to encourage small and marginal farmers to raise investment. The NSS data shows that small and marginal farmers barely invest. Another important suggestion is that the state government must prioritize spending between types of investment and types of subsidies in terms of attaining higher agriculture growth and reducing poverty. I'm just quoting results from my own study that I did with Dr. P.K. Joshi. We estimated marginal returns from various types of investment and subsidy, which differ across the states. We grouped the states into low, middle, and high per capita income because we were not able to handle 20 states in the empirical model. So the analysis shows that though marginal returns from additional public investments are higher for subsidies, spending on select subsidies in low income states can enable higher productivity. For instance, additional spending on research and development in low-income states would yield 9.92 times higher returns as compared to that in high-income states at 3.23 times. Similarly, low-income states will have higher returns from additional spending on power and irrigation subsidies compared to high-income states who have higher returns from additional investment in energy, education, and health. Clearly, the diminishing marginal returns have set in Punjab and Haryana in investment in irrigation. And roads also. It is therefore important that states prioritize expenditure on type of investment and subsidies. The additional expenditure and support should be more towards less developed states having a significant growth potential and presence of small and marginal farmers. We argued for rationalization in the distribution of subsidies in view of increasing cost of input relative to price of output. Reforms have already been underway through initiation of solar pumps, micro irrigation, and support to organic farming. On direct income support for inputs, we find that it may assure efficiency in input use and financial autonomy to farmers, but it has various challenges in its estimation and implementation. For instance, in one of the studies done by Dr. Ramesh Chand, he estimated rupees 7,000 per hectare of direct income support in case of withdrawal of price support on fertilizer. But in a joint study which I did with Dr. Joshi, we estimated 5,300 per hectare cash to be given to farmers in lieu of price support for fertilizer and power. This amount will vary across the states depending on the cropping pattern and input use. We also have to think that withdrawal of subsidy may result in rise in fertilizer price and may reduce its use and hence lower productivity. There's also a problem of ready cash available with farmers. Further, one has to think of cash distribution to tenants, sharecropper, women farmers, and landless laborer. Similarly, in case of price-based output subsidy, that is MSP, we find that the price policy has incentivized farmers to increase investment and production and help the government to maintain price stability and food self-sufficiency. But it has, its deleterious effects. Government is also concerned about the accumulated stocks and rising food subsidy bill. A system of price deficiency payment in agriculture market as implemented in many states like Jharkhand, Odisha, Telangana seems transparent, less distortionary and equitable, which can be tried in other states. Or maybe, India can experiment with a differential price policy as adopted by China. The price policy varies across the states and some conditions are attached, in case of farmers availing the states availing the this procurement measures and price policy that is availed by the farmers. So the main point that I wish to make in this issue is that the center has never been disconnected from agriculture as the constitutional provisions would suggest. Agriculture serves certain national development goals and thus requires considerable handholding, especially during the times of natural calamities and market risk. However, states lack resources and are highly dependent on the center for funds and grants. Both have to work in tandem, even if there are conflicts in their respective agriculture policy agenda. Also, it is a known fact that the level of agriculture development differs across the states and a one-size-fits-all approach in the center's agriculture policies may not suit the specific needs of the states. It is therefore very important to think about increasing the state capacity and improving governance in the State Department. Centers should give flexibility to states in strategizing action plans to encourage farmers and the private sector that are suited to their particular requirements. In order to ensure proper spending of assigned grants, a better coordination within the institutional structure is required to prevent overlapping or duplication of schemes and their effective implementation. There is also a need for convergence of various schemes and hence effective coordination across ministries, for which an empowered group of ministers should be formed. Within the states, cabinets, subcommittees on agriculture and related departments, including irrigation and power, should be constituted. I feel that institutions such as Interstate Council and Niti Aayog should be involved in resolving disagreements, if any. Now I come to the third and last issue, which is directed more towards raising farmers' income, and that is the agriculture marketing system. Unlike agriculture and irrigation, which are state subjects, the Constitution has taken a different approach to the marketing of agriculture produce. Article 301 says that trade and commerce will be free across all of India. Article 302 gives Parliament power to legislate on interstate trade. States, on the other hand, quote Article 304 to claim that the state legislature has powers to legislate on trade and commerce and can impose tax and restrictions on intra and interstate trade in the public interest. I think this is the basis for the discontent of states regarding centre's intervention in passing the recent three marketing laws. The positive and negatives of our agriculture marketing systems are known to everyone now thanks to the media. In brief, agriculture markets have large number of sellers, that is farmers, in comparison to the buyers. Improper price discovery, poor infrastructure, high marketing cost are other impediments. Farmers also have low bargaining power and little storage. On an average, from what consumers pay, they get 25 to 60% share in fruits and vegetables and around 70% share in cereals due to minimum support price. In many states, farmers have to pay mandi fee and face other hurdles. It is expected that due to alternate platforms parallel to existing mandis and reforms that have been underway since 2003, markets will become more competitive, will enable economic and marketing efficiency, farmers will receive better prices, and consumers lower prices for commodities. But the newly enacted farm laws have raised endless debate and controversies known to everyone. The main apprehensions are: will the buyers buying at lower cost pass on the cost saved on procurement to the farmer? What solution is provided in the law in a situation of companies cancelling the contract or delay in taking the produce? Yet another issue is states' revenue loss from mandi fee, and also how the government will take the responsibility of creating infrastructure to attract private investors, provide adequate credit and extension services to farmers, to link them with the buyers, companies, FPOs, cooperatives, etc., etc. I think I reserve my comments on this and would say that reforms in agriculture markets are a must for farmers' betterment. It is possible that the center can compensate states for a few years for the loss in revenue, if any, due to parallel markets. States should be given more autonomy in making amendments in the laws as per the farmers' requirement. States should upgrade the existing mandis and also Grameen Hard's weekly markets online of these mandis. Arrange grading and sorting facility to save farmers transportation cost. Maybe traders be given training to become aggregators for the FPUs, companies, etc. The marketing reforms that are underway are essentially long-run measures. The emerging ecosystem of startups may see investment in the medium term. We expect private investment in food grain and perishable to increase in another 10 years. Exporters and processors may set up their own purchase center in the trade area, which will provide facilities specific to a particular commodity or for commodities. Let me wind up by saying that Indian agriculture has several distinct aspects which require a multi-pronged approach. States, in coordination with the center, must have a district level plan if agriculture growth and employment are to be taken up to the next level. Each state must prioritize agriculture sector and devote more outlays for investment and rural infrastructure and initiate reforms in the output and input markets. I would say that be it price support or income support policy for input, it should be targeted towards low-income states for higher returns, small and marginal farmers, tenants, women, and landless farmers. States can issue farmers' card to all cultivators till land records are updated. This would hopefully provide them some safety nets and credit and enable higher investment, input use, and productivity growth. Indian agriculture has vast opportunities in innovation. We see a few startups on weather advisories, digital farm services, custom hiring, and agriculture e-retailing. While research indicates a positive impact of these innovations on crop diversification and exports, their long-run impacts are not known with certainty. We certainly need yield augmenting and water conserving technology, facilitate diversification to high value commodities, and improve export competitiveness. There is so much ad hocism in exports, and agri-share in global value chain is not even 1%. I think I should stop here. These issues may perhaps require another webinar. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'll be happy to answer to your questions and also seek opinion on Vision Agriculture 2050 from participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Seemaji. Very, very good. You have covered a lot of width and the depth. I think my audience must be very happy to listen, and I'm sure they have a lot of questions. But before we open the floor for the question, let me make few comments on your thing. You talked about the subsidy versus the investment. That's very, very important question, and subsidy is about 25%, and the private investment in agriculture is very low. Rather, the growth is negative, and even in the public investment in agriculture, the growth is very low. So those are the issue. And then you talked about the fertilizer subsidy, which according to you, you estimated on per hectare basis. That is very good idea. And when I was in CACP, we also estimated around 5,400 per hectare basis. It has to be given. Seemaji, you can now unshare your presentation so the screen is wide.
So I press stop sharing, right?
Yeah, you stop. That's better now. So those are the issue. And on MSP, basically MSP is a instrument of pricing, but many times it is used as a price of as an instrument of income. Technically speaking, the MSP is an instrument of pricing, but it is used as a instrument of income. Now, how do you see now, especially when the government decided to make 50%, at least 50% more than A2 plus FL, and with the result that the procurement price have gone up and the subsidy on FCI has increased. How do you view it, and how it will help in increasing the farmers' income? So these are the very critical points that is agitating. I would like to have your views on this, and thereafter we'll open the floor for the Q&A. Over to you, Seemaji.
It's a very pertinent question, and answers are hard to find. You think the CACP chairman would not resolve it? All I can say is that subsidy is a short-term measure. It can help farmers to purchase input, but it is the investment that can contribute to higher growth. So I'm not for removal of subsidy, because there are 86% of small and marginal farmers, and the latest data shows that majority have less than 1 hectare of land. So all I want to say is that I understand in the long run we need more investment, but this is a political economy. We give so much of loan waiver, we are giving so much of subsidies on everything. The point is this subsidy reaching the needy? Is it reaching those who need it the most? And this is the reason why we estimated the marginal returns on subsidies and investment, just to highlight that the states that need more subsidy are the eastern states. The states who need less subsidy are Punjab and Haryana. Rather, they need more investment in health, education, and other infrastructure. I mean, we have to take agriculture to the next stage in Punjab and Haryana, whereas, the eastern states, which are very, very, lagging in agriculture growth, they should be given more priority. But again, having said this, there are many issues in, targeting the subsidy. World Bank says smart subsidies, but how do we make subsidies smart? It's a very big question in our country. Very big question. How do we do it? It's a political question also. What do we do?
Yeah, I understand you are. I mean, there is a dilemma always. So we are very, very hard to decide on one hand on the economic principle, other is on the political, and sometimes people say good economics is good politics, but it may not be always the case. So let us let the issue rest here, and we'll open the floor for the question. Charan, uh, we can now invite the question from our participants.
Yes. Professor, you would have seen in the chat box, there are too many questions. We can't hear you. Professor, we can't hear you.
You seems to unmute, Seema-ji.
Let me see the chat box because I'm very new to this WebEx. Huh?
Okay. No,
I
no,
always use Google Meet. Let me check. Huh?
and
Oh my
also-
God. Oh my God,
Professor,
so many.
Yeah, there are too many questions for you. You can choose which one to answer. In the meantime, I had a question for you, Professor.
Yes, please.
Looking at 2050, I've been wondering, like there are states in our country which are very rich in horticulture and floriculture. And also there are Northeast, which is just a virgin part of our country. And they have very good and large number of agriculture products which are not really being commercially sold. In your vision of 2050, where do you see the role of horticulture, floriculture, and Northeast agriculture products?
If you see the latest statistics in the northeastern states, you will find that the area under paddy is increasing at a very faster rate, which is a very positive step, right? It's a very positive thing. If you see data for northeastern states, the area under paddy is going up, and that is a deliberate policy of the government to enable northeastern states to grow more of paddy, being, climatically rich, because rainfall is very good in those states. Now the problem in, I mean, it's a very good step, and I feel that ever since this Bihar has initiated this, program BREGI, so in Bihar also there has been increase in area under paddy and in under horticulture. Now the issue is that there's no problem in producing more output. There's no problem at all. Indian farmers are too good. They can produce anything in any circumstances. The problem is the next stage, that is marketing. When they don't get adequate price for their produce, this is where the problem comes. So the production and marketing are intertwined. You produce more, prices go down, you don't get a good rate for your produce, and then next year again you are dissuaded from producing that particular commodity. So the action plan for 2050 has to be more on diversified products, which has to be in tandem with better marketing arrangements is the way forward. This is what I feel. Like in Punjab, farmers are willing to grow quinoa. If you remember, we hear news that quinoas are thrown because they didn't get proper prices, although Ministry of Agriculture tried to purchase, but even then, they are not getting good prices. Similarly, in Rajasthan, there's a lot of potential to grow pulses, and government increases minimum support price so that farmers in Rajasthan grow pulses. But the problem is that there is no vision. Everybody grows something, same thing, and the price market crash because the demand and supply, there's a mismatch. So, in the ministry also forecasting of crops is done, but there is something lacking, that we are not able to forecast the demand and accordingly, match the supply. And that is where the problem comes. So after every 3-4 years, we import pulses, and then we increase MSP that our farmers should grow pulses, but then again the prices crash. So this production and marketing should go hand in hand, which is not the case in our country. That is the major issue.
You are on mute.
Yeah. Professor Seemaji, what are your suggestion that market, the demand should be in sync with the production, because the demand should be forecast in such a manner and before the sowing season start, so that this cobweb syndrome, you increase the production, prices crash, then farmers switch over, then this is cycle keeps on repeating. So I would call it as a cobweb syndrome, because you get it. So those are the false signal given by the market in some sense. So you have to produce according to the from plate to plow. What is plate is a kind of symbolic of the demand, and plow means what you cultivate. So we have to do not what you produce, and then demand has to be generated. Demand, you have to look at demand first as an independent variable, and then production should be synced and calibrated accordingly. So you have some thoughts on it, how to synchronize the production in sync with the demand?
Mr. Ashok, you being the CACP chairman, the moment MSP is increased for one commodity, the whole production is tilted towards that.
Right.
So, the crux of the problem is our policies are not in sync with the market. So what do we do?
Absolutely.
So, it's not an easy solution, but then, for example, if livestock activities are increasing in Bihar and it's market driven, nobody is going there for any support to dairy farmers, right? So nobody is giving any kind of support. And even if you see the poultry industry, that is coming up in a big way. So there is no government intervention, nothing. It's all market driven. So if poultry can, grow without any, government support and without any interventions, then why can't agriculture? There's too much intervention. I feel that, the planning commission, before Niti Aayog, the planning commission had started district level plans. I think that should be the way out. Even, in January, you might be knowing that Niti Aayog and FAO had organized a seminar. Even there, the people who worked in Ministry of Agriculture, they all agreed that we have to have a disaggregate level plan for agriculture. So the problem is Bihar produces so much lychee. When it reaches Delhi, we pay more than $100, but the Bihar farmers are not able to get anything. Right? So people say that there is no market intervention, there is no APMC, nothing. Then why is Bihar not able to, farmers are not able to get good prices? But if you recall, the precondition for these farm laws or all the, halabulla that is about, farm laws, the precondition is that government has to create necessary infrastructure. And the law and order situation has to be good in a particular state, even though there is no APMC, no mandis in Bihar, but private investment is not picking up. So there are external factors which are dissuading private investors to go to Bihar and invest in agriculture. So those preconditions are missing in our country in many states. Besides, the issue that investment is very, very low by the farmers. That is again a separate issue. So private investment cannot come, but it has come in poultry in a very big way. So that is, I think it's going to be something, we should cheer about. So same way horticulture, same way floriculture, I think they are going to pick up very fast. There was a time we never thought of soybean meal. And now India is exporting soybean meal. Maize area is going up because of demand for, feed in other countries. So there has been, there are signals which farmers get and they do it. But the issue is that there has to be a proper policy framework, which is missing in many states. Even in Punjab, I think water table is going down. Like we did a lot of research in Punjab. Even farmers are aware that water table is going down. But then they should be given some alternatives. If you keep on increasing MSP every year, they don't have any alternative. It's a very, profitable crop. In other, there is so much risk. Like we did a survey for organized retail chain, how Mother Dairy is procuring, how Reliance is procuring from farmers in Haryana. So we did a survey of around 500 farmers. They are very happy that somebody should come and procure the way Mother Dairy does in Himachal Pradesh and in, but then they need other kind of, help, which is missing. Scaling up is a major issue. If you see the share of organized retail chain procuring from the farmers, it is not even 1% of the value of total output, or I would say the total output that is being produced. Hardly 1% is procured by these organized retail chains, Mother Dairy and Reliance. So how to scale it up? That is a major issue. So I feel, the states which are very ahead in their agriculture, they should go to the next stage of processing. So government must invest in agro processing in Punjab and Haryana, in Himachal. Himachal is doing it in a big way. So if you see the extent of processing that is done in our country for agriculture commodities, it is only 10%. Of the total output that is produced. Only 10% is processed. If you compare this figure with developed countries, it is 45%. So now this 10%, out of 10%, 70% is the cereal processing. So then, fruits and vegetable processing, we are nowhere. So investments are needed in this sector. And the sad part is that we are spending a lot on agriculture, but that is primarily in subsidy. We are not spending in investment. Public investment is very, very low.
Professor, there are lots of questions for you in the chat box. Would you like to attempt a few of them at least?
It says that land holding in Himachal Pradesh are normally below an acre per family, hence commercial farming is not visible. Procurement of mechanical equipment is not a viable option. Thus, collective farming may be an option. You are right, Dr. Mahesh. Is this Dr. Mahesh, right? Or Major General Dr. Kulwant? So I don't know who has questions.
This is me, Major General Dr. Kulwant Nijjar.
Okay, so collective farming is a very good option. Like we used to have cooperative farming during the 60s, but now the problem is that the farm holdings are increasingly getting smaller and smaller day by day because of no joint family system and brothers dividing the land. But like when we did a survey in Bihar, we found that there are different parcels. So there's a land given to 4 brothers, but then parcels are at different places. Now, how do you install a tube well? So when we asked about pooling of land, why don't you guys pool the land and you start? They say that it's not possible for us because land on the right-hand side has higher value compared to land on the left-hand side. So while division took place, one brother is given one parcel in the high value area and one in the low value area. Like, if it is near the road, it has more value, like that, So they say that we are not interested. It's impossible to do pooling in Bihar. But if you talk about Himachal, I have no idea about Himachal. It's totally different kind of farming there. No idea, sorry. It has
Professor,
apple orchards. Yes, please.
Professor,
Sorry, Major Nijjar again. Himachal, the valleys and the plains are carrying out farming of maize, paddy also. I'm talking about that piece of land. Maybe collective farming is an option.
Maybe since cooperative is not possible, and that is why government is laying so much stress on FPOs. They are putting so much, and NABARD is going to give a lot of seed money to opening up producer companies of FPOs. So it's like, alternative to cooperatives if they are successful in, inviting private sector in opening FPOs.
Professor, one question that comes to the mind is by the Subrata Gupta. Why are producer companies not coming up the way it should, which should help farmers get better returns?
NABARD has been giving seed money, rupees 3 lakh per FPO. So in Bihar, if we see the data, there are 33 FPOs opened up. But when you go to the field, there is no FPO. So, you know, agriculture, business in agriculture or investment in agriculture by any person requires a lot of commitment. Returns are very, like, you know, you open a mobile shop, you can get returns within a year or two. But in agriculture, returns are not as quick as in other business. Number two, there are so many risks in farming. Number three, there has to be some commitment. That commitment is missing because returns, land is fixed. So returns to land are up to a certain level. It cannot go beyond a level. Plus there are droughts, there are floods, like in Rajasthan, if it is too much heat, there's a crop failure. So returns are not as high compared to in agriculture as compared to other sectors.
Right. There's another question by Subrata himself. Can the government, by use of subsidy, control excess production of crops?
How? Like, you know, what Haryana is doing. Haryana has given incentive to farmers, I think 7,000 rupees per acre or per hectare. I don't recall exactly. I'm sorry. They are encouraging farmers that we are going to give you 7,000 rupees per acre or per hectare if you divert away from paddy wheat rotation. So the issue is that states are aware, farmers are also aware, but this kind of incentive, or you can say subsidy, is a very good step in, you know, diverting farmers away from value-added commodities. It may work, like it's working in Punjab also. They have this scheme, Pani Bachao, Paisa Le Jao. So if you save water, if you save energy, so government is going to reimburse cash. So diversion to other crops through these incentive scheme is working in many states. One can try that.
I find these two questions interesting. You know, you can choose. One is by Dr. Sanyal. How much India has reduced AMS and increased GBS since the UK round?
I didn't get it. How much India has?
Reduce AMS.
Sorry?
Reduced AMS.
Aggregate measure of support.
Yes, and increase GBS since the Uruguay round.
Okay, I know about the aggregate measure of support. So the as per the clause, as per the stipulation on domestic support, I just for, you know, others to know that there are 3 stipulations under the Uruguay round agreement on agriculture. First is market access, second is domestic support, and third is export competition. So under market access, there were certain stipulations which most of the countries agreed to, including India. But under domestic support, the requirement is that the country has to reduce the support. It has to be maximum 10% of the total value of output, right? So now we have reached that ceiling, that is 10%. Based on input and output support, we have reached the ceiling. But the problem is that the talks have failed because there is no level playing, as USA and Europe are not willing to reduce subsidies. So just to let you know that income support under Uruguay round is allowed, how much, whichever you can give. But there are 3 boxes, green box, blue box, and amber box. So income support is allowed to be given to farmers by every country, but it is the price support that is under, you know, fire. So India being, you know, giving price support, that is under fire, and the ceiling is 10%. Now the problem is that since other countries are not listening to the WTO and other countries, so India is also like, you know, we are also, you know, not getting. So there's a lot of politics. But if you see the estimates on subsidies, we have 1,200 billion in 2011-12 prices. If you see USA and, you know, other countries, it amounts to a big amount. I can't even recall the figure. So we say that, we are just not, up to the ceiling. This is one thing. And another point of controversy is that the estimation has to be done at 1986-88 prices. So India has given a plea that 86-87 prices pay, you haven't accounted for inflation. So how do you expect us to reduce? Because 86-88-7 means MSP has to be constant, which is not possible. So world reference price is 86-88, MSP has to increase, inflation has to increase. So they said that these numbers are not correct. So it's a gray area, a lot of controversy and no consensus.
And therefore the peace clause.
Yeah, therefore the peace clause, and we are free to give subsidy, but mind it, our subsidies are much lower compared to what USA and EU are giving to their farmers.
Hello.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
yes, go on. Identify yourself and then ask the question.
Can you have the bamboo? Any idea in subsidy?
No idea. Sorry. It's there it comes under plantation sector, and one can find out from the Ministry of Agriculture website. Because we have so there is so much support that is given under RKVY, Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana. So there is a investment support, there is a input support under investment support under RKVY. So whether bamboo is part of it, I'm sorry, I have no idea. But thresher is part of it, micro irrigation is part of it. There are many, thresher is part of it, farm implements are part of it. But I have no idea about bamboo. I'm so sorry.
Can I interpret here? Can I interpret here regarding bamboo? Actually,
yeah, please,
I would like
please,
to say,
please.
actually, regarding bamboo, I am basically from Tripura. So in Tripura, we have a lot of scope on bamboo, and we are doing also in Tripura. So mainly in Forest Department of the Tripura, they can help him. I do not know from where Mr. Jamatia is. I think he's from Tripura. If he's from Tripura, he can contact to me. Otherwise, he can contact to the department directly, the forestry department. They will help in this regard. Thank you.
Ma'am.
And I have also that idea. They can help purely, or he can contact to me regarding that.
Okay.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, there is another question, interesting. I mean, why farmers are protesting against the new farm law? What is your opinion on the law? It is advantageous, disadvantageous for the farmer. From Pintu Majhi, he is asking this question, which I think is in the mind of many people.
Yeah.
You know what? I already said that I reserve my comments on this. It's a very political issue now. But if you ask me personally, I think we should go in for reforms. I mean, if states have some problems, there is every possibility to amend the laws. They are not written on the stone. There is possibility, like APMC 2003, where we worked a lot on APMC 2003, and contract farming and organized retail chain were allowed in that. So there were a lot of apprehensions at that particular time that this is going to, private companies are going to, do whatever they wish to, and they are not going to pay for it. Who is going to listen to, farmers? So much, discontent was there and apprehensions were there. But these farm laws are nothing but extension of APMC 2003. There is nothing new in these laws. It's just what I say, old wine, new bottle, wo jo proverb hai. There's nothing new. You just have a look at it. There's nothing. These are just only thing I can say is that, what do I say? I mean, we must go in for it. I mean, it's high time. Farmers are not getting adequate prices for their produce. You go to but traders make them pay. And many a times, they go and expect. You visit any mandi, visit mandis in Haryana, you see the plight of farmer. They go spend 1 week, 2 weeks, because the auction is done as per on daily basis. So depending upon the buyers and the sellers are a few, because there are maybe 100 farmers on that particular day, and buyers are, many, like traders buy, right, and then they sell it to other. So now there is no competition in that. There are no competition in the mandis, right? It's a dual marketing system for cereals, right? So if the FCI guy is there, like we have seen in Narela Mandi, if the FCI guy is there, the farmers and the traders and the FCI guys have nexus. The prices, Dr. Ashok, you know that prices, MSP is a floor price. Floor price doesn't mean that, wholesale price has to be above the floor price. But in most of the mandis, you see that the floor price, that is MSP, and the wholesale price are same. Why is it same? It's a minimum support price. But why wholesale prices are just, at the same level as MSP? If you see data on Bihar, the wholesale prices fall below the MSP. Why is it so? Because there is no procurement. Hardly 10% of the paddy that is produced in Bihar is procured by the cooperatives. Whereas if you go to Punjab and Haryana, the maximum is taken by, FCI. But there is a nexus between traders and the FCI. I mean, this is what I feel. I mean, there is cartelization, clear-cut cartelization. They don't allow prices to go up. So we need alternate platforms. Like, as consumers, we have choice. We go to mall, we go to mom and pop store, we go anywhere and purchase things, right? Same way, farmers should have choice. Like, one of these cases, very interesting to tell you, that women in one of the villages in Bihar, they do this goat rearing. So they click the picture, put the goat picture on the some website, and they get the price, and this is how they are learning to sell their goat. So these are the new things which should come up and help farmers. Like in case of Bihar, where we did survey, they produce so much of sugarcane, and we told them why sugarcane area is going down. They said there's no mill. Whom do we give? So if you allow sugarcane to be there, right, obviously, mills have to be there. You have to encourage the private sector to come and, start the mill. And there is so much scope to, take out ethanol out of it. But in Bihar, so many sugar mills have shut down. So problems are so many, and it's not easy to find solution. The state government has to gear up and think about agriculture in a coherent way. I mean, center cannot do everything. Center can have only a vision, but the state governments have to be proactive in finding some approach. But they think that, giving loan waiver or giving subsidy is a solution. No, it's not a solution. Bihar is coming up in a very big way. Bills and Melinda Gates are going to invest, and we did a study for them on digital farm services. How farmers will be made, smart with the mobile phones, and they'll get all kinds of information on their app, right? I know that it's not going to raise productivity, but at least it's going to help them in understanding the soil condition, rainfall condition, and then, it's going to help them a lot in knowing the prices that are prevalent. Right now, what is the option? The trader comes to the village, and he takes produce from everybody. So whatever is the price, they say yehi price hai, lena loan. And farmers say, okay, we save the transportation cost if they're coming. Then there are weekly markets, because the produce marketed surplus is very, very low with the small farmers. So that is the main reason for they getting exploited by the middleman. And we as consumers pay a very high price for so many commodities. So the gap is very, very high. So this marketing efficiency is a major issue in agriculture,
Can I
sector.
ask a question, please?
Yeah, please.
This is Janesh Shastri. My question is, you mentioned about district level planning in agriculture. If the farm laws are to be implemented, what will be the way the district level planning be done? Is it clear? The framework of the formulas, take the framework of the formulas, and then supposing that we want to implement them at the district level, how the district level planning should be done, consistent with the formulas.
So if I understand your question is that if there is a district level planning, how the formulas are going to work?
How the formulas are to be implemented in that district.
Oh, it's not like this, district level planning is for production purposes. The formulas are only for marketing. So in case of marketing, if you see, there are approximately 20,000 mandis across the country. That is the regulated market, village hearts. So the point is that the district level planning as suggested by the Planning Commission at that particular time is all about deciding about the cropping pattern. How farmers are going to allocate area to different crops. The marketing laws is something different because marketing law is one, the option for farmer is to sell in mandi. Option for farmer is to sell in other markets, which like organized retail chain or some companies are coming up or FPO or cooperatives. So whether it is a district or a state or a regulated mandi, so, the farmers will have multiple choice to sell, like, farmers from Haryana come to Narela Mandi in Delhi to sell their produce.
I see.
Right? So there was a time when interstate trade was restricted, but right now farmers can sell to anybody in any market. Right? There was a time when farmers was not allowed to sell. He was supposed to sell to the nearest mandi, not like, for example, if there's a Delhi farmer, he was supposed to sell to Narela Mandi, but right now this is not the case. Interstate trade in agriculture commodity, food grain is now free, so farmers can go to any mandi to sell. That is the and under APMC 2003, this was the
how do you plan the production in that case? How do you plan the production in that case in a district? How do you plan the production of a particular crop in a district?
I read a case about China. So what they do, as Dr. Ashok was saying, a bottom-up approach. So they, decide about the area that this particular thing is to be grown or this particular thing is to be produced. So accordingly, they plan. But right now in our country, this kind of planning has not been even thought about.
Oh my God.
They have a cluster-based approach in China. So accordingly, their price policy varies across the provinces. So the province have less water, the production of paddy is not allowed in that province.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, can I ask one question?
Yes, please.
Ma'am, that was a very great presentation. But ma'am, we have seen in particularly the chocolate industry that there is a concept of bean to bar. And due to that concept, farmers who are producing the beans of that chocolate and cocoa, they are getting too much benefit and their income have improved drastically. And some of the Indian states are also replicating such model like the Kerala and Karnataka. But can we replicate such model in other crops as well? The concept like bean to bar, and if yes, then in for which crops and how can we replicate such model, ma'am? And should government provide any benefit for such things to the farmers?
In Haryana, like I stay in Delhi, very close to Gurgaon. So the farmers near the Gurgaon area, that is Sonipat and all, they grow flex seeds. They know that there's a demand for flex seeds in urban areas. They grow broccoli. They grow because they know, and the state department in Haryana, in those particular areas, Sonipat and all, the agriculture department is very proactive in encouraging farmers to grow these crops because they know that there's a demand from for these crops in Delhi, like broccoli, lettuce, iceberg, strawberry. All these are grown in, close proximity to Delhi. So now it's the state that have taken initiative, and farmers are, receptive to that demand. See, what do farmers need? What do farmers need? They just need irrigation, right? And little bit of cash to buy input, right? And then the second issue is market. So they are willing to take risk provided there's a market. So that, opportunities are there, but, somehow I feel that those who have more than 2 hectares of land, they have, they have savings. The problem is that it's a very low level of savings with Indian farmers. Those who are 20% or 10% who can afford, they are diversifying very fast. But the problem is Bihar, West Bengal, where, there is no such system. So incentives are to be given in those states compared to, other states. I'm sorry if I'm biased, but, it's high time. We must focus more on eastern states rather than, the northern states.
Thank you, ma'am.
Charan, it's now time to let us wind up because this is 6:45. There are still few questions, and I think we have to stop here. But before I request my friend Charan to give you a formal vote of thanks, let me say a few things on this. This was a wonderful presentation. You covered so many issues which all are relevant. And then basically, in a sense, you said the farmer need broadly 2 things: getting the prices right and getting the markets right. I mean, this would cover almost everything. And if farmers are enabled to get the markets right and getting the price right, I think their income will definitely rise. And with these few things, I would request, because Professor Charan will give you a formal vote of thanks, and perhaps he has some important announcement also. So over to Charan.
Professor, it was very interesting, and we are really impressed with the vast knowledge that you have and the examples that you gave us. There is a question which is very, very interesting also, and I don't know if you would like to mention or answer that before you leave. If farmers are so wise, and I'm sure they are very wise, and they're also pretty opportunistic, they know what will sell and what will not sell, and they shift very quickly, as I understand from your presentation. Then the question in the chat box was, why are they still using chemical fertilizers when they know that these are harmful to them, and they suffer from all sort of kidney failures and cancer and receding water table? Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, the income of the farmers.
You want to reserve your answer?
It is 2012. No. In 2012, 13 by a farmer household was 6,500 per year. In 2016-17 survey done by NABARD, the income is 9,000 per annum, right? So let's say one farmer household is earning 9,000 rupees from farming, which is not even 1,000 rupees, right? So 35% of their income is from wages, 35% from livestock activities like that. So if you see the statistics across the states, the figure is not, the farmer income figure is not impressive. There is so much, disparity between how much agriculture person is earning and how much a person in tertiary sector is earning and how much a person in industry is earning. So if you see the labor productivity, that is output per worker, in agriculture, it is hardly 36,000 rupees. In industry, it is 1,50,000 rupees. In service sector, it is 2,50,000 rupees. Now you see the gap between how much agriculture on an average is earning, how much industrial person is earning, and how much service sector person is earning. right? So now farmers' needs are much more than, because he has to spend on education, he has to spend on, I'm talking about the small farmers, right? Large farmers are well off, they don't have any problem and they are pretty good, enjoying subsidy and everything. It's the 86% of the farmer. We have 12 crore farmers, out of which you can say that 20% may be better off, but rest are earning very, very low. So if we use chemical fertilizer and we use pesticide, the output per hectare goes up. So farmers in Punjab, I belong to Punjab, right? So farmers in Punjab, they know that this fertilizer is very harmful. The nutrient, the leaching, because of overuse of fertilizer or soil condition is going bad, the water under the ground is not up to the mark. He or she is aware, but the problem is that the returns from cereals, and the moment he or she applies fertilizer and pesticide, the income goes up, right? This is number one issue, that he needs money. 5 crore are women farmers, 12 crore other farmers, and then there are laborers also, right? So now this is one part of it. The second part is that, what do I say? One, he has to earn income, which is like, very, very low. Second, their expenditures are too many and they are not able to, handle those expenditures. So where do they go? Third point is that in case we shift them to organic farming, as the government has been doing, for 3 years, output per hectare will be very, very low. It is the third or the fourth year when he or she is going to realize higher returns as compared to the based on use of fertilizer, right? So for 3 years, he will have an income loss. Who is going to compensate that? So organic farming, you listen and you feel very good about it, but then for 2-3 years, some compensation has to be given, because yield level will be very, very low for 2-3 years. Once the soil sets in, then he or she will be able to have higher output per hectare from the natural farming. So
Thank
as
you
I
so
said, if you see the data, savings are very low with the small farmers. We can't expect, for rich farmers, like, their income is 13 times more than what the small farmers are earning. So if I'm saying 9,000 rupees per year is income on an average of a small farmer, so the large farmer and medium farmer will have 13 times more income. So there is disparity, a lot of disparity. So if a shift to organic farming means that, again, state has to support for 2 years at least.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was very, very enlightening for all of us. We must thank you for agreeing to come and speak to us. We must thank Dr. Vishen Das for having approached you and got you to speak to us. Now, we will have the recording ready tomorrow by noon, and we'll share the recording on our website. We'll send you the link also. And I'm sure people in the audience, participants in the audience, will also benefit from the recording that's available. I have an exciting announcement to make. Next Tuesday, which is July 20th, same time, 5:30 to 7, we have Dr. Ayhan Kos. He's from Turkey. Dr. Ayhan Kos is the chief economist and director of the Prospects Group, World Bank. They have recently just about a month back, they have come out with their flagship publication called Global Economic Prospects. And he'll be speaking to us for about an hour and a half on India and global economic prospects. So I'd invite you all on Tuesday, July 20th, to be with us at the same time and take advantage of this presentation. So with this, let me thank all of you. Let me thank Professor Seema Bhatla. Let me thank Professor Ashok Vishen Das for having chaired the session today, and all the participants who have been with us on a Friday evening to listen to this knowledge webinar series that we have started. Look forward to meeting all of you next Tuesday. Have a happy weekend. Thank you.
I would also
Thank you.
like to say thanks to
Thank you very much.
everybody for their patient, hearing. And Dr. Charan, it was really nice, interacting with you. And Dr. Ashok, thank you so much. And I know, I covered a very wide forum, but then you asked for Vision 2050, and these are the 3 important issues. I thought, we need to have vision on these 3 important. I mean, they are interrelated, they are distinct, but they are interrelated and have a lot of implications for agriculture growth.
Thank you,
so
madam.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.